All right, let's go ahead and get started, everyone. Hello, and thank you for coming to our first event on spring, is it the spring? 2013, thank you, event for the Federalist Society Student Chapter here at University of North Dakota. Thank you for everyone coming. Just to let you know, since you already probably realized that there wasn't food here, there will be food after the lecture. So today we're going to be talking about, we have the privilege to hear from Grover Joseph Rees, who's a former ambassador to East Timor, and he's going to be talking about immigration and refugees. And we are a nation of immigrants, unless you're a Native American, but that's another lecture. My own great-grandfather came from Sicily in 1901 and built up his life, and generations later, obviously, I was affected. Ambassador Rees was a United States ambassador to the Democratic Republic of East Timor. He was also the Chief Justice of the High Court of American Samoa and a general counselor to the INS, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, and also was an assistant professor at the University of Texas at Austin. Thank you very much. Let's introduce, welcome, Ambassador Rees. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here, notwithstanding the temperature. I think it's actually the coldest place I've ever been. I went to Alaska once, but they were having a warm spell, and it was in the 20s. It was in December. So it's interesting. I posted simply a quote from the weather.com report on my Facebook page last night, just to let my friends know where I was. And Tim commented, "Don't worry, it's no big deal." It was 2 degrees. Weather.com says 2 degrees feels like 10 degrees. And then I had to explain to my friends that that was Fahrenheit, not centigrade. Thank you, and thank you all for your courage in living here for at least 3 years. I don't think I could do it. I get upset in Louisiana when we have our 10 days that go below freezing during the winter. I don't know if some of you have seen the articles that I've been noticing in the last few weeks that talk about the fact that after the election, prominent people in the Republican Party are deciding that they need to be, and that the party needs to be, more pro-immigrant. And these articles, which tend to be written by people who are not enthusiastic about the Republican Party, always treat this as a kind of opportunism. That, okay, now they lost the election, they didn't get many Hispanic votes, they didn't get many Asian votes. Now they're going to discover that there should be immigration after all. Well, it's true that the election may have been a wake-up call, but I want to argue that Americans in general, and conservatives in particular, American conservatives in particular, usually have been and should be pro-immigrant, pro-immigration, not for opportunistic reasons, but because it's consistent with their general philosophy and with their traditions. And I think that this case is overwhelming. It's just that we apparently have to remind ourselves about it every few years. First of all, statistically, the United States is by far the most generous country in the world in terms of how many immigrants we let in, both as an absolute number and as a percentage of our population. We admit almost 1 million people every year as legal immigrants, and that includes family-based immigration. It includes employment-based immigration, which tends to be people with special skills. It includes a rather small program called the Diversity Program, which is sometimes known as the Lottery or sometimes as the Irish Lottery, which is designed for countries that don't have much of the first 2 kinds of immigration. And we admit and adjust the status of about 100,000 refugees every year, something in that neighborhood. So all put together, it's 800, 900,000. That is about a third of our population, and it's way more than any other country in the world admits. Our refugee numbers alone are several times as high as the 3 or 4 other countries in the world that admit a significant number of refugees. The 7 or 8 countries it is now that admit a significant number of refugees. And so we've always been generous, and we wouldn't have gotten that way if it was inconsistent with our political system. If either liberals or conservatives were absolutely, in terms of their principles, against immigration, if it was a threat to anything that we really believe, our system wouldn't have evolved in that direction. These things don't happen by accident. Now, why did this happen, and how did it happen, and why is it that people are questioning it at all? I think it's always useful on this issue, as on other issues, to go back to the words of Ronald Reagan, who in his farewell address to the country in January of 1989, his last formal speech as president, he used a theme that he had often used in speeches before, which is America as a shining city on a hill. And he said, you know, I've said this a lot, but I need to explain what I mean by the shining city on the hill. Not only is it a beacon of freedom for people around the world, but once you get inside the city, it's teeming with people of all races and creeds and colors living together happily in peace and harmony. I'm paraphrasing, but I think I have it almost exactly right because it's such a great quote that I have looked back on it often. He said, and if the city must have walls, the walls have doors, and the doors are open to anyone with the will and the heart to get here. That is how I have always seen it, and that is how I see it still. So, of course, we often hear about the Statue of Liberty and what it says on the Statue of Liberty. It doesn't say, send us your electrical engineers and your adult unmarried children. It says, send us your poor, your tempest-tossed, your huddled masses yearning to be free. So, across the American political spectrum, there's always been kind of a romantic attachment to the idea that we are the land of the free, that we are a symbol and a beacon for people around the world. And I think ideas, even romantic ideas about ourselves, have consequences. You know, every country in the world, President Obama got in trouble for pointing this out in a few speeches toward the beginning of his term when he said, well, yeah, there's American exceptionalism, but there's also Greek exceptionalism and British exceptionalism and so forth. Without getting involved in whether it was appropriate for him to say that in the particular context in which he said it, on some level he's exactly right. The people of every country in the world believe that their country is the greatest nation in the world. What's interesting, therefore, is why they think it. Some countries believe, some people of some countries believe that their country is the greatest in the world because their people are the greatest in the world. It's got something to do with race. It's got something to do with what's in the blood. Other countries believe that they have a uniquely great culture, that they have built something up over the years that no one could ever hope to duplicate in terms of how refined they are, how sensitive they are, their great literature, their language, their cheese. You know who I'm talking about. For these countries, you can see that immigration, at least immigration of people who don't look like them or people who don't share their culture, would be threatening. It would threaten to dilute something that they regard as important. In the United States, we don't believe that we're the greatest nation in the world because of our race, because we don't really have a race. We have lots of races and always have, at least lots of ethnic groups have since the very early days of our republic. We don't believe that we have a uniquely great culture in the sense that these other nations, we do think we have a good culture, but what we believe is that our culture is layer upon layers of cultures and that's what makes us great. But why we believe and always have that the United States is the greatest nation in the world is because we believe that we are founded on great ideas, and that we try to be true to those ideas. Sometimes we disagree about the content of those ideas. You know, we believe in democracy, we believe in equality, we believe in freedom, but we disagree, at least at the margins, about the content of those ideas. But we all agree that it's important to get it right, and that it's those ideas that make us a great nation. Now, if you think you're a great nation because of ideas, and people who don't even look like you, who don't even speak your language, who don't even share your culture, want to come and join you and become part of your nation, not only is it not threatening, it's an affirmation of what you regard as great about yourself. You know, it's like the Catholic Church. Before Vatican II. Those of us who were Catholics, our church was criticized, still is, but you know, we always took pleasure in the fact that when people had a deathbed conversion, it was usually to the Catholic Church. I remember being a kid and thinking how amazing it was that out of all the things I could have been born, I was born an American and a Catholic, the one true faith and the one true country. And I think we Americans have always believed that we're an exceptional nation, and part of the reason we believe it is that all these people want to come, more than want to come to any other country in the world. We're also unique, or almost unique, among at least the larger countries in the world, in that we have tended, in the debate between the tension between equality and freedom, we tend to choose freedom more than, for instance, the countries in Europe. Part of that is because of our history. We've never had a nobility. We Americans, while we don't worry so much as our political system doesn't worry so much as other political systems have about the fact that people wind up unequal, that accidents of birth may give them an advantage. If you're born to rich parents, you've got certain advantages. If you're born to educated parents, if you're born with good genes, you've got certain advantages. Our system isn't designed to compensate for that as much as some other countries are. But we've never had a law that said that an accident of birth absolutely determined your destiny, at least outside the immigration context. And, for instance, affirmative action, or at least affirmative action that's based on quotas, has always been controversial in this country, much more than it is in some other countries that have it, because it says we're going to choose equality of results over equality of opportunity. Our idea is that you give everybody equal opportunity, or you try, and then you let the chips fall where they may. And yet, what is an extremely restrictive immigration law if it's not a choice of guaranteed comfortable results for those of us who are already here against equality of opportunity? What we're saying to somebody is, because of an accident of birth, you can never be an American. You can never have this thing that we all regard as one of the greatest goods that anybody could ever have. And it's just because of where you were born. Doesn't matter how smart you are, doesn't matter how hard you work, doesn't matter how virtuous you are, you can never be an American. Now, of course, every political system discriminates between people who are already inside the civitas, the community, the political community, and people who are outside. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. I'm not saying we should have no immigration laws and have open borders. But we have to recognize that there's a tension between saying that we're going to choose freedom, we're going to choose equality of opportunity inside the political community, but we're going to choose we're going to choose comfortable results over freedom and over equality of opportunity in terms of admission to the community. There isn't an absolute contradiction between those ideas, but there's a tension, and that's why I think that's one of the reasons that we've always said, as Reagan said, you know, let people come here, let them, if they want to work, if they've got the will and the heart, if they want to try to build our society and make a better life for themselves here, that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. It's always been the premise of our immigration laws. Significantly, I think we've always regarded, we also tend to believe in free trade, and that's controversial. There are winners and losers in free trade. But free trade in labor, free immigration, or relatively free immigration, is just a special kind of free trade. I mean, it would be kind of odd that we're buying all these widgets from foreign countries, and that the one thing we wouldn't allow to come into our country is the people to come and build our own economic system and help it compete better with other economic systems. Significantly, we've also believed that the benefits, as I alluded to earlier, the benefits of immigration are cultural, not just economic. If I were to ask you to name an American food quickly, and you mentioned the first one that you could think of, well, some people would say hamburgers, but a lot of people, as I would say pizza. And that wasn't always true. Even when I was a kid in the 50s, pizza was called pizza pie. And while it had existed, it had been around in some Italian communities in the United States for a long time, it hadn't achieved the currency that it has now. But basically, pizza is one of the basic American foods now. And that's a trivial example. There are more important examples. But I think we've always thought that it's beneficial that people keep the strong things about their ancestral culture. They keep often, we've always believed that as Americans that what works in America is hard work, and we believe that we're devoted to family, we believe we're devoted to God. The sociology of immigration is that those people in actual practice tend to put those virtues into practice more than people who were born here, or at least as much as people were born here. And so immigration has strengthened our culture, not just our economy. Now, I say that, but there's always been an anti-immigration movement in the United States. But here's the interesting thing. Every country also has an anti-immigration movement, but our anti-immigration movement is even unique because our anti-immigration movement, from its very beginnings until the present day, has always claimed not to be anti-immigration. They're pro-immigration, they're just against the ones we're getting now. Or conditions have changed and we need to have sort of a temporary lull, a moratorium on immigration. I did some academic research on this when I was an academic, and I tried to find the earliest anti-immigration arguments. It was interesting because I had done some research into the 14th Amendment. I was trying to find out what the legislatures that ratified the 14th Amendment thought about some of these questions like school desegregation and other questions that had come up under the 14th Amendment. A lot of research had been done on the debates in Congress, and not much had been proved. But since what mattered to me as a matter of political theory were what the ratifying states thought, and since the best evidence of that was newspapers, because they tended not to keep verbatim records of the debates, I decided to look at a lot of newspapers at the time when different states were ratifying the 14th Amendment. And I found out very little about the 14th Amendment, but boy did I find out what they thought about the Irish. And I can promise you that no nasty thing that's ever been said about a Haitian or a Hmong immigrant in the last 20 years is as bad as what they were saying about the Irish in the 1860s. We've always had people who said, well, 20 or 30 years ago we were getting good immigrants, but now, these ones, they're dumb, they're uneducated, they're rowdy, they're Catholic. They got all these problems. They're not going to fit in. The earliest example that I could find when I tried to go looking for it was in the 1820s from an Indiana newspaper. And they said, 40 years ago, the beginning of our republic, we were getting good immigrants. We were getting the kind of immigrants that we needed. Anyway, we needed people to build the country. Now we don't need people to build the country anymore. You can practically see your neighbors. And the ones we're getting now are paupers. The countries are sending us their paupers, and they're sending us their criminals and their not so bright people. And so we need to stop immigration because we're getting the wrong kind of immigrants. And so people have always been saying that. Now, just because they said it before doesn't mean, and we're wrong, doesn't mean that it might not be true now. And we're hearing a lot that at the level of immigration that we have now, and particularly with Spanish-speaking immigrants, they're never going to assimilate because there are just too many of them and they can get along in their own communities and so forth. And you know, there certainly is some truth to the fact that in Miami and some other places, you can get along in Spanish, and you can get along in Spanish for a good long time. And to the extent that you believe that the English language holds us together, that could be threatening, and maybe that would be an argument, a good argument for reducing immigration. But you know, you've got to go back and look at our history. Assimilation has never altogether happened in the first generation. We admitted a lot of Eastern Europeans, Italians, Jews in the very early part of the 20th century and the last part of the 19th century. We pretty much stopped in 1921 when Congress adopted a very restrictive immigration law. And yet in the 1950s in New York, there were 5 newspapers being published in Yiddish. So it's true. I know lots of immigrants who still speak Spanish, who still speak Vietnamese, whatever language it is, in their homes. But you know, I don't know anybody who was born in this country and who's 12 years old or older who doesn't speak perfectly good English and who hasn't assimilated. Now, personally, I think it's a shame that so many of us in the United States speak fewer languages than our grandparents did. And I hope they keep their ancestral language. But of course they should learn English, and I believe they will. Another good argument, though, against that maybe immigration today is different than it was before, is that, you know, in the early part of the 20th century, if somebody came, we didn't have a big social safety net. So a whole lot of people, I think it was something like 1/3 of the immigrants who came went back. If they didn't make it in the United States, if it just didn't turn out to be that the skills they had were working, and generating a living for themselves and their families, they went back to the old country. We now do have a social safety net, and the argument goes, and I don't think I think it has some force, is that no country can afford to be the high bidder in an international welfare auction. And to the extent that we have both very liberal immigration policies and a far more robust safety net than some of the places these people came from, that instead of getting people who are coming to work, we could be getting people just coming to go on welfare, and that would be bad for lots of reasons. All I can say to that is, so far empirically, it doesn't seem to be happening. There is welfare use, there is social service use, of course, by immigrants, but generally it's by old people, or it's by people in the very first months that they're here. And statistically, everybody who's studied it shows that immigrant groups use less welfare, fewer, when I say welfare, I mean systems that are designed for the poor, systems that are designed for people who haven't been able to make their own way. And that they also have a lower crime rate than Native Americans. And by Native Americans, I mean people who were born here. So while we have to watch that, and I don't think it would be wrong to have carefully thought out restrictions on how soon you could get here and then start receiving public assistance, and we do have restrictions like that. So far, we don't seem to be the high bidder in an international welfare auction. Another argument about immigration that's different today and that we have to be more careful than we used to be, and I think it's a good argument, is that we have today instantaneous communications and almost instantaneous transportation. So, you know, before 1921, we didn't have restrictions, numerical restrictions on how many people could come to the United States. And we didn't have special categories of people who could come. If there wasn't anything wrong with you, if you weren't likely to become a public charge, if you didn't have a disease, if you hadn't committed a crime, you could come in. And as many people could come in who didn't have those things wrong with them as wanted to come. And at one point, we were admitting between 0.5% and 1% of our population every year, which is higher, substantially higher than the percentage we admit today. We couldn't do that today, because if we just announced that we were going to have open borders and that everyone could come who hadn't committed a crime, who wasn't a terrorist, who didn't have a dangerous communicable disease and so forth, it probably wouldn't be 1% of our country. At least in the first couple of years, it would be higher than that, and it really would be disruptive. You know, just because you want all your friends to come to dinner at your house doesn't mean that you want them all to come the same day. So we do have to have numerical restrictions. But I think we should make some changes and go back to the way that it was before 1921. And here's the reason. The message that we ought to be sending as the United States of America to potential immigrants is, we are still the most generous country in the world. We really want you here if you're going to come and help build our society and build our economy and make a better life for yourself and your family. And if you don't have any of those vices that I've referred to. But we want you to come legally. And if you come illegally, we will catch you. We will catch you soon, and we will not be particularly nasty about it, but we will send you back, and you'll be at the back of the line. Instead, we're sending exactly the opposite message, and we have been through all kinds of, we've had an immigration reform bill about every 10 years for the last, since the 60s. We didn't have one in the 70s, but we had one in the 60s, we had one in the 80s, we had a couple in the 90s, and we've had piecemeal immigration reform, usually getting tougher since then. And yet, year after year, it's been the same. The message we send is, don't even think about trying to immigrate here legally unless you're in one of the relatively small number of special categories. You know, if you're an IT specialist, or if you're a nurse, not a doctor, by the way, but a nurse, if you are an immediate relative of an American citizen, if you are in one of those diversity countries that doesn't have many immigrants otherwise, and you happen to win the lottery, or if you have a well-founded fear of persecution in your home country, then you've got a shot. It might take some time, you might not get in, but you've got a good shot. But if you're in any other category, if you're a carpenter, or you are a plumber, or you are just a laborer, and you don't know what you maybe want to be, and you just want to come here because you like it, you believe in America, forget it. Don't even think about coming legally. But if you come illegally, you can probably live in the gray market. You can live at the margins of the society and the economy. And if we ever catch you, we'll be really nasty to you, but we probably won't catch you. That's the message that we've been sending and that we're still sending. And we ought to change that. We ought to change it both ways. First, you know, we had this immigration reform in 1986, and it was it's what I call the Washington Compromise. Everybody got in a room, because just like now, we had millions, several million illegal immigrants. And so one of the big crises was, what do we do about these illegal immigrants who are already in the country? And we had still people coming in, and yet from the pro-immigrant standpoint, it looked like there was a lot of nastiness out there and that we were being too restrictive. So everybody knew, both sides agreed that the system was broken. They disagreed radically on how to fix it. But they got in a room, all the pro-immigration and the anti-immigration people, they got in a room and they began by convincing themselves that the worst thing they could possibly do was to do nothing. Now, this is almost never true. You can almost always think of something worse to do than doing nothing. But then what happens when you have people who radically disagree and they get in a room and they just are determined to do something no matter what it is? I can't exactly explain why this is, but in the end, the compromise becomes that they all throw out their good ideas and they put their bad ideas into a package, and that becomes the compromise. Now, I think the reason for this actually is psychological, and it's that your bad ideas are much harder to give up than your good ideas, or you would have given them up a long time ago. But what basically happened, aside from a lot of small fixes, the two big things that happened out of the ERISA, not ERISA, I've forgotten the acronym, but the big immigration reform in 1986 is it on the one hand, it had an amnesty. And by an amnesty, I mean they created a special visa that could only be given to somebody who proved that he or she had been living here illegally. And the second thing they did was to create employer sanctions, which turned every small business person, as well as large businesses in the country, into an immigration enforcement agent. And there was, although there wasn't supposed to be, there was a correlative drop in traditional law enforcement. Because let's face it, nobody wants to be the cop on the beat. Everybody wants to be in a task force. And this is true not only in law enforcement, but in all areas of work. But what you need in order to enforce the immigration laws, like any other laws, we're kind of learning this in community policing, is you don't need to be tough in the sense of being mean. You need to be present. You need to be visible. You need to be there. The Border Patrol needs to go back to patrolling the border. And we need to have however many of them there are, that it's just unrealistic for people to think that they're going to be able to sneak across. And we've got to get control of visa overstays by doing something with these little pieces of paper that we make people fill out. And we're doing more, by the way, than we used to do. But I mean, there was a congressional hearing on this once, and the commissioner said, oh, it's so hard, all the technical aspects of this. And one of the congressmen said, then we should privatize it and farm it out to Blockbuster, because they know when you're 24 hours late. So we should get control of overstays. And then when we know somebody's overstayed or they didn't show up for their deportation hearing, we should do traditional law enforcement case by case, go find them, and in a nice way, tell them that they're going to have to go back. Until we get back to traditional case-by-case law enforcement, we can have all the workplace sweeps we want. You know, the idea of not worrying too much about when people come in and just saying that we're going to have employment restrictions and we're going to make life miserable for them once they get here is it assumes that the United States can win an unpleasantness contest with wherever these people came from. And that's not always going to be the case. So we've got to go back to traditional law enforcement. And then if we really do cut off the flow of legal immigrants, we'll have 300,000 people, 300,000 workers a year, roughly, that our economy seems to think it needs won't be coming in. Well, what should we do about that? We should create several 100,000 new places, new immigrant visas that are not restricted. They could start out as non-immigrant visas, but they could go, you could have a path to an immigrant visa and eventually to citizenship for people who don't have any special skills and who don't have a family connection. And maybe we'd have to have a big lottery because a lot more than that would want to come. Maybe we could do it based on a point system where, you know, speaking English would get you something and, you know, some other skills would get you something. But we've got to be able to tell these people, you know, in this recent debate, I heard so many times, oh, I don't mind if they come as long as they come legally. Well, we have to make that not a lie. Because if we say we don't care if you come legally, but then, by the way, there's no way you can come legally, that's kind of a bait and switch. So we should have lots of spaces, which we don't have now, for unskilled workers, for people who just want to come and build the country. And we should, you know, put the Border Patrol back at the border, do what we have to do. I used to say put the Marines at the border, but nobody liked that. The Marines didn't like it, the Border Patrol didn't like it, the ACLU didn't like it, and Mexico didn't like it. But we've got to do what we can to send that message, both parts of that message. We'll catch you and send you back, and we'll do it soon, before you've built roots here and got a family here and been elected to the city council. You know, we will deport you when it's not as controversial as doing it after you've been here for a long time. But you can come legally. You've got a serious shot if what you want to do is build your life and build America. Now, if we do that, I mean, I'm sorry, I don't, you know, the whole amnesty debate, look, I understand. Illegal immigrants are more like speeders than they are like murderers. And I don't hate them, and I don't think we ought to hate them. And most of them, you know, there are laws that decent people will violate, and immigration laws are among them. And I sympathize with them. But I was general counsel of INS when we were administering the first amnesty, and I'm sorry, but it's just bizarre to create a visa and say and it's the biggest number of visas of any visa there is, and then to say the only way you can get this visa is to prove that you came illegally. We actually had lawsuits where people went to INS and said, okay, give me my legalization. And we said, no, you can't have it because you were here legally in the first place. It was just on a temporary visa and now you have to go back. And they'd say, no, I was illegal. And we'd say, no, you were legal. And they'd say, but you said I was illegal. And we'd say, but we were wrong then. And we shouldn't be investing resources. We shouldn't be sending that kind of message. What kind of message does that send to the people who've been waiting in line, or to the people who never came because they didn't want to violate the law? If we had a whole bunch of new spots